Scotland is a land of quiet strength and enduring traditions, where the wild hills meet the steady hand of an industrious folk. Its people, the Scots, have forever been shaped by the rugged beauty of their home, lovers of the open countryside and builders of well-ordered towns, fierce in their loyalty to kin and merry in their revelry. They are a people who cherish the old ways and the old stories, passing them down by firelight as the wind sings throughout the heather and the waves crash against our ancient shores. But the Scots have not always been known as such. The first name that remains to us for the inhabitants of this fair land is Picti, given to them by the Romans. The name means the painted ones, and reflects the Roman views on those they labelled as barbarians, peoples beyond the boundaries of the Latin Empire. To the Romans, the Picts were a shadowy, brutal race of untamed warriors, a perception that lingers in the imagination of many today. But long before the name of Scotland was ever spoken, before the first stone of a castle was laid or the first clan gathered beneath its banner, there was another time. A time when the land was wilder still, when deep forests stretched across the lowlands, and in the highlands there only echoed the cry of the eagle and the footfalls of the hunter. This was the world of our distant ancestors, the first Scots, who made their lives in wooden halls and fishing villages, who carved the bones of the land with ploughs and tools, and who raised mighty circles of stone that stood silent against the turning of the stars. It was a world both strange and familiar, an age of mystery and toil, of reverence for the earth and sea, and though the centuries have buried much of what they had built, their spirit still lingers in the land that they tamed. So let us now step back through the mists of time to the dawn of Scotland, and walk once more amongst the hearths of those who first called it home. This is Scotland and her story. In the dim ages, before the world was shaped by the hands of men, the earth was a wild, untamed thing, pulsing with raw power and mystery. Men were not as they are now. The blood of one species did not flow through their veins, but many fierce and brutish strands wandered the savage land, including modern-day Scotland. Each strand was a beastly echo of a bygone age of only semi-sapients on earth. These were ape men, creatures of brutal strength and primordial fury. With squat forms and heavy boned frames that lent them the ferocity of the beast from which they had only recently risen, their brows were low and shadowed, their eyes sharp with the cunning needed to hunt, kill and survive. But they lacked the fire of innovation, the deeper knowledge that would mark the coming of the first true men. They knew nothing of fire or metal, nor the mastery that would one day bend nature to mankind's will. These secrets lay beyond them, as distant as the stars in the cold, endless sky. Their link to the earth was one of blood and grit, a primal tie born of survival in a world of fang and claw. They did not look upon the land as something to claim or cultivate, but as a wild force to endure, a ruthless mother that fed them only if they wrestled their sustenance from her. The soil, dark and loomy, was the womb from which they had clawed their way forth, and it was much a part of them as the thick forests and raging rivers that marked their territory. The earth sustained them, but it demanded their strength in return, testing them with every day that they clung to life. Their world was raw and merciless, ruled by the ancient law of the strong. Only the powerful survived, and the weak were forgotten, their bones gnawed by wolves or lost to the roots of ancient trees. They worshipped no gods that men would remember. Their spirits, if they had them, were nameless forces, silent shadows in the forests and storms. They left no mark on the world that would endure, no monuments to their existence. They lived in darkness and ignorance, strong in limb but weak in spirit, bound to the earth, yet blind to its secrets. But within them, buried deep, there was perhaps a faint spark, a glimmer of a future beyond the endless hunger, beyond the cold nights and bloody battles. Perhaps, given time, they may well have risen above their animal instincts. They might have sensed deeper meaning. But the ancient forces that rule the world are relentless, and they had other plans. A great age of ice came down upon the world, as if the heavens themselves sought to reclaim the earth. The wind turned cruel and cold, and the once thriving forests grew silent, choked by snow and frost. The rivers, once wild and free, froze over, and the plains became barren wastes of endless white. The land itself became a prison, a harsh realm of death and silence, where life clung on only in the shadows. Towering glaciers crept across the ground, slow but unstoppable, grinding all beneath their frigid weight. The land that had once sheltered the ape men turned on them, as if to cast them out. Against this foe, the apes men's brutish might meant nothing. The skills which had sustained them now offered no refuge. The soil, locked beneath a layer of frozen death, gave no bounty. Their hunting grounds vanished beneath the snow, and the beasts they had hunted had become monsters of the ice. Mammoths, with tusks like spears, saber-toothed cats with fangs like blades. Even the dark caves, once places of refuge, became traps, as these predators followed them into the shadows, their hunger as endless as the winter. But it was not the cold, nor the beasts that proved their true doom. It was themselves. As food grew scarce and the nights lengthened, the tribes turned upon each other. The blood that bound them to each other became corrupted. Survival drove them to darker acts, and cannibalism, perhaps once unthinkable, became a grim reality. Brotherhood vanished, replaced by desperation. Their ancient bond, once primal and simple, was shattered as they took from each other what the land could no longer provide. They had fought to survive, but the land demanded more than brute strength, more than endurance. The ape men did not understand this, and it was their undoing in the land of the Scots. Desperate, they fled south, driven by the bitter winds and the advancing ice, hoping to find warmth and life beyond the endless winter. But many did not survive the journey. The glaciers crept onward, swallowing their bones, crushing their bodies into the very soil they had fought so hard to tame. For ages uncounted, the northern lands lay silent, frozen beneath the unyielding ice. The tribes that had once roamed the forests and hunted by the rivers were gone, their stories lost in the cold wind, their bones buried beneath the glaciers. The land, as patient as the stars, waited for a new breed of men, one that would look upon it not as a beast to be survived, but as a realm to be made their own. And so, as the ice receded and the land softened under the sun, there first came the Neanderthals, strong and proud, before in time the Homo sapiens, the first men, with minds alight with ambition. It was these two who would wage the final war for the earth, a war not only of blood but of spirit, a clash that would decide who would master the world itself. The Neanderthals were creatures of unyielding strength and primal instinct, shaped by a world as harsh and unrelenting as they were. Their existence was defined not by the comforts of civilization, but by raw survival. Every feature of their being, every aspect of their life was a testament to their struggle against the ice, the beasts, and the unforgiving earth itself. Their skulls were long and low, crowned with a heavy brow ridge that gave an imposing presence, as though they carried the weight of the ancient glaciers upon their own foreheads. Their faces had broad noses that warmed and humidified the frigid air, noses built for endurance in the biting cold. They were also shorter and stockier than the men who came after them, their bodies forged for power rather than speed. Broad shoulders and barrel chests marked them as titans of brute force. Their wide hips and thick limbs were built to conserve heat and anchor them firmly to the earth. Neanderthals were hunters, not of the swift chase but of the deadly ambush. They lacked the stamina to run long distances, but what they could not chase down, they cornered and overwhelmed. With clubs and stone-tipped weapons, they brought down beasts far larger than themselves, wielding their strength with deadly precision. Theirs was a hunting style that demanded cunning and ferocity, a grim dance of survival where every successful kill was a triumph of muscle and grit. Their teeth were larger than those of Homo sapiens. They were tools just as much as weapons, capable of tearing through sinew and bone. Even the bones of their middle ear carried subtle differences, adapted to the harsh conditions of their icy world. Every element of their anatomy, from their squat forms to their immense strength, was an answer to the challenges of the frozen land they called home. For all their rugged exterior, the Neanderthals were not without complexity. They lived in tight-knit social groups, bound together by necessity and perhaps by something deeper. Evidence of burials found in the Caucasus Mountains suggests that the Neanderthals may have had beliefs about life and death, or perhaps even a rudimentary form of religion. These signs point to a people capable of thought and emotion beyond the immediate demands of survival, though the exact nature of their inner world will forever remain a mystery. In contrast though, the Homo sapiens were and are a breed apart, driven by a relentless hunger to thrive where all other species have merely endured. Our lives are not tied to the earth as a passive cradle, but as a thing to be shaped and mastered. The early humans, the ancestors of all that would follow, were creatures of vision and adaptability, wielding not only strength but the power of their minds to carve their path through a harsh and untamed world. Their skulls, high and rounded, housed the spark of ingenuity that set them apart. While the Neanderthals bore the heavy brow of brute strength, Homo sapiens carried the look of calculation and foresight. Their faces lighter, their eyes sharp with intent. They were taller and leaner than their Neanderthal counterparts. Their forms built for endurance rather than raw power. Their limbs were proportioned for movement over great distances, allowing them to chase prey across plains, outlasting even the swiftest quarry in an unyielding pursuit. Tools were more than weapons. They were extensions of their will, crafted with precision and purpose. Where other pre-human species only saw stone, they saw potential. Flint became spearheads, bone became needles, and fire became their greatest ally. They were not bound by the limitations of their environment, but sought to bend it to their needs. They hunted not with mere ambush, but with strategy, stalking prey with cunning and coordination, driving beasts into traps or over cliffs. It was not just strength, but intellect that turned the tide of the hunt in their favour. Homo sapiens were marked by their ability to adapt and innovate. While Neanderthals conserved heat with short torsos and limbs, Homo sapiens fashioned clothing and shelter to combat the elements. They understood the land not just as a provider of sustenance, but as a canvas for their ambition. They planted the seeds of agriculture and reaped the rewards, laying the foundations of society and beginning the long march towards civilization. Their social structures were more intricate than those of any creature, ape or no, that had came before. Language, art and ritual emerged among them. Signs of a people capable of abstraction and imagination. Paintings on cave walls told stories of their hunts and their dreams, and burial rites suggested a belief in something beyond the material, which we will be exploring later. They were bound by shared purpose, and their tribes could work together in ways that amplified their collective strength. The Homo sapiens of this era were not content to exist within the bounds of the natural world. They sought to rise above it. They moved across continents, their migration a testament to their unyielding drive to explore, conquer, and claim. In their hearts there burned a spark of ambition that no glacier, no beast, and no rival could extinguish. They were the architects of their own destiny, driven by a fire that would carry them far beyond the constraints of the wild. While the predecessor great apes to Homo sapien lived and died by the rhythms of the earth, Homo sapiens looked to the horizon, their gaze fixed on what could be. The glaciers began to retreat, and with them the Neanderthals were swept into the shadows of history. The first men claimed the soil beneath their feet, building their tribes and shaping their destinies upon the bones of the old race. The Neanderthals were gone shortly after the end of the last ice age, outbred and outcompeted by Homo sapien, allowing for Homo sapiens to eventually come to Scotland. The story of Scotland's first inhabitants begins around 12,000 years ago, as the last ice age began its final retreat. For thousands of years, the land that would become Scotland lay beneath a colossal expanse of ice, its valleys carved by glaciers and its coasts battered by rising seas. But as the climate warmed and the ice began to melt, it exposed a rugged and fertile land ripe for exploration. The first people to set foot in Scottish soil arrived during the Mesolithic period, around 12,000 BC. These first Scots originated in what is today Morocco. They moved both north through Spain into Western Europe and across the North African coastline all the way to Egypt and Turkey. Yet, due to natural boundaries and the lack of advanced seafaring capabilities, they did not spread into the Mediterranean or Central Europe. These first Scots, as stated before, were, unlike Neanderthal, parallel in terms of evolution and species to we the modern Scots, yet they did not have the entirely same genealogical makeup. Height varied from tribe to tribe, though the average was around 5'3" for men, with women being around 4 inches shorter, altogether 5 inches shorter than modern Scots. Along with olive-toned skin like that of an Italian, paired with darker hair colours, and though brown eyes were the norm, as they are now, blue eye colouring was present in their genome, and likely also presented in the phenome of these peoples. If the sight of a blue-eyed short Mediterranean would not already give cause enough for these early men to stick out in modern Scotland, these western hunter-gatherers, as they are called, had skulls much longer than the skulls we have today, with childlike small concave noses, altogether a distinctive early form of Scot. These pioneers came first to the British Isles around the year 12,000 from mainland Europe, and they reached the regions of southern Scotland by the year 10,000, drawn in by the newly available resources of this emerging land. Sea levels were still rising, reshaping the coastline and creating the islands and inlets that now define Scotland's geography. Crossing narrow land bridges or navigating coastal waters in simple boats made from hollowed out logs, these early settlers followed the game and the seasons, their movements dictated by the needs of survival. The first signs of their presence in Scotland can be found in ancient sites in the south of our country, particularly in areas like the Solway Firth and the Tweed Basin. Here, archaeologists have uncovered flint tools and microliths, small sharp stone blades likely used for hunting and processing game. These tools suggest that these early peoples were expert hunters, tracking deer, boar and smaller mammals, as well as fishing in the rivers and foraging along the coast for shellfish and edible plants. This was long before Scotland had a name or borders, but these first settlers were no savages. These early people were hunters and gatherers, hardy and resourceful, their lives built around the rhythms of nature. Their tools were simple but effective: flint knives for cutting, spears for hunting, and nets for fishing in the icy rivers. They learned to use the materials at hand, wood, bone, and stone, to craft the implements they needed to survive. With hides stitched together, they fashioned clothing that held off the chill, and their shelters of timber and stone provided respite from the winds that howled across the land. These communities were small, likely bound by kinship and necessity. Elders would have provided guidance, their knowledge of the land and its dangers, honed by experience, whilst the strongest hunters would have held a place of respect for their ability to provide. Life would have been collaborative. No one could have survived the harshness of the land alone. Though leadership may have been informal, these groups must have had structure rooted in shared labour and survival. Their beliefs were tied closely to the world around them. The forces of nature, rivers, mountains, the sky, were not just physical, but likely imbued with meaning for them. Offerings may have been left at significant places: a stone circle, a high hill, or a hidden spring. These acts were a way of recognising and perhaps appeasing powers greater than themselves. Their religion, if it could be called that, was deeply personal, embedded in the practicality of their lives. Artistic expression was not absent either, even in these early days. The using of flint and bone tools, they carved patterns and symbols into stone and wood. These were not merely decorative. They carried meaning, perhaps recording events, marking territories, or holding spiritual significance. Their art shows us that while survival was paramount, these people also sought to understand and interpret the world that they inhabited. Technology, though basic, showed ingenuity. All the tools they crafted were efficient and well suited for their environment. Their knowledge of animal behaviour and the seasons would have helped them hunt and forage effectively. They may not have farmed the land, but they were no strangers to shaping the environment, using fire to clear brush and encourage growth of plants useful to them. Though they lived in a challenging world, with a 50% child mortality rate and arthritis in over 40% of the adult population, the society was not without its complexity. Relationships, rituals, and shared experiences formed the bonds that kept them together. These early settlers were more than wanderers eking out a living. They were communities that laid the groundwork for the Scotland we know today. Their legacy, written in stone tools, ancient carvings, and the traces of their campsites, reminds us that even in the harshest of conditions, people can adapt, innovate, and create. These first settlers were the foundation of Scotland's long and storied history, their resilience and ingenuity setting the stage for all that would follow. By 8000 BC, Mesolithic communities had ventured northward, tracing the rivers and coastlines into the rugged heart of what is Scotland. Evidence from sites such as Cramond, near modern-day Edinburgh, or in the island of Orkney in the Upper Hebrides, reveals the remarkable adaptability of these settlers. They harnessed the abundant resources of both land and sea, living in temporary settlements of circular shelters constructed from wood and animal hides. These structures could be swiftly dismantled and relocated as the seasons dictated, reflecting the nomadic nature of these early societies. Their footprint extended later on into the highlands, the lochs and the forests, leaving behind hearths, flint tools and midden piles of shells and bones that provide a vivid glimpse into their diets. These people relied heavily on the sea, fishing its depths and foraging for shellfish, but they also hunted deer and boar and gathered berries and nuts from the forest. Yet as time marched on, these ancient ways began to give way to a seismic shift in human existence: the arrival of agriculture. Around 4000 BC, new settlers arrived from mainland Europe, bringing with them domesticated animals, seeds, and a revolutionary way of life. Agriculture transformed Scotland's societies, offering stability and the ability to produce surplus food. Fields of barley and wheat began to replace the dense forests, and livestock such as cattle and sheep became a cornerstone for the economy. This change allowed communities to settle more permanently, fostering a level of social complexity that had not existed before. These early farmers built homes of stone, particularly in areas such as Orkney, where abundant resources and relative isolation provided ideal conditions for development. Orkney, with its fertile soils and strategic location, became a focal point of this new age. The island's inhabitants constructed remarkable stone monuments, such as the village of Skara Brae, which stands as one of the best preserved Neolithic settlements in Europe. These structures, with their hearths, stone beds, and intricate drainage systems, testify to a sophisticated and organised society. The people of Orkney were not merely surviving, but thriving, creating art, developing rituals that hinted to a deep connection with their land and the cosmos. However, this flourishing culture did not arise in isolation, and around 3000 BC, a great plague swept across Europe, devastating communities and marking one of the earliest recorded pandemics. Yet Orkney, due to its geographical isolation, remained largely untouched by the initial waves of this catastrophe. While the populations of mainland Europe and southern Britain dwindled, Orkney's relatively intact society began to emerge as a regional power. This advantage allowed its people to develop their influence, becoming a cultural and economic hub during the late Neolithic period. This convergence of geography, innovation and resilience laid the foundation for Orkney's prominence in prehistoric Scotland. The combination of agriculture, social stability and relative immunity from early pandemics enabled the island to stand out as a beacon of early human achievement, a cradle of culture and power that would shape the identity of Scotland for generations to come. I will now use Orkney to give a glimpse of what Scottish Neolithic life would have been like. Then as now, cultural practices and lifestyle vary significantly depending on where you are in the world, due to differences in environment, resources and traditions. However, the communities of Orkneys are a good representation of Neolithic life in Scotland, as they were regionally significant and exceptionally well preserved. So I will be delving now into Orkney to explain the complexity and details of Neolithic life in Scotland. By 4000 BC, all across Scotland, communities were transitioning from mobile hunter-gatherer lifestyles to lives centred around permanent settlements and agriculture. This shift is evident in the remains of many Neolithic villages across Scotland. One of the best preserved examples that exists is on Orkney, Skara Brae. This village gives a window into the domestic lives of these early Scots. The houses in Skara Brae were made of stone, which has greatly aided in their preservation. This was common practice in areas such as Orkney that were scarce in trees, with homes in most other regions being built of timber, turf, or wattle and daub. In Orkney, as in most all other parts of Scotland, homes were designed to provide warmth and protection from the elements and animals. Hearths were at the centre of these homes, positioned for cooking and heating. The people of Skara Brae used tools made of stone, bone and antler, and their diet reflected a balance of farmed food, fished food and foraged foods. Evidence from midden piles, rubbish heaps and other archaeological digs have revealed a reliance on crops like barley and wheat, as well as domesticated sheep, cattle and swine, and all types of fish and shellfish native to this region. This diet of nativism likely held true across all of Scotland, though the specifics of diet and dwelling would have varied again from region to region. The advent of agriculture, as stated before, being introduced from Europe in the 4th millennium BC, caused a massive societal shift. Farming didn't just allow for surplus food, it also allowed for the development of permanent settlement and led to significant population growth. Communities began clearing forests to make room for fields, a labour-intensive process that would have required coordinated effort and likely fostered more structured social hierarchies. Agriculture also allowed for the accumulation of surplus resources, which contributed to the building of some of stone monuments, structures seen in Orkney and elsewhere in Scotland. These surplus resources enable Neolithic Scots to invest in projects that reinforce their cultural and religious identity rather than just contribute to their survival. Religion and ritual in Neolithic Scotland, as well as in earlier Mesolithic times, were likely deeply intertwined with the rhythms of nature and the cycles of their environment. Although no written sources exist from this time, and the archaeological evidence rarely shows exact beliefs or rituals, by studying the better documented Celtic religion and spirituality, we can find possible roots for their practices from earlier societies, such as the Neolithics. Through this process, we may infer the basics of their religion, though the specifics of their beliefs will likely remain elusive for the rest of time. Their monuments, burial practices, and alignment with natural phenomena offer significant clues. Their religious art and ritual life reveals a fascinating confluence of shared beliefs and regionally unique local beliefs. In particular, the enigmatic carvings on the megalithic monuments such as spirals, lounges, and the ship symbol connect Scotland to a broader network of Neolithic symbolism across Europe and beyond. The ship symbol, found in Scotland as well as Ireland, Sweden, Brittany and sundry other places, is one of the most compelling and best understood artistic religious aspects of Neolithic spirituality. These ship symbols are primarily manifested in rudimentary carvings of ships, often accompanied by solar discs, and are interpreted as representations of spiritual journeys, perhaps the soul's passage to the afterlife. In Scotland, the ship carvings from this period are admittedly scarce, but the connections to Irish megaliths, which have clear ship symbol carvings within them, such as Newgrange and the Dow, suggest a shared artistic religious motif. At Newgrange in Ireland, there exists a rather crude carved stone which depicts a ship with what appears to be people on board beneath a solar disc. At first glance, it's quite difficult to make this out. However, when compared with higher quality carvings of a similar thing in Sweden and Brittany, it is clear that they represent the same motif. In most such carvings, boat and solar symbols often appear together. The images are thought to have symbolised the sun's daily journey across the sky and its descent to the underworld, ferrying the souls of the dead. This Neolithic artwork is highly reminiscent of the ancient Egyptian solar religion, where the myths say that the sun god Ra traversed the heavens in his sacred barge, ferrying the souls of the blessed. This is no coincidence, in my opinion. Keep in mind that all I'm about to say could be disproven by the ever-advancing field of genetics. However, the current understanding is that the first peoples to settle in the British Isles after the end of the last ice age, as said before, came from the westernmost part of Africa. They crossed the Straits of Gibraltar, then went up through Iberia and France before entering Britain. This is proven by archaeological evidence. The same strand of people went east across Africa, but they did not traverse the Mediterranean Sea as they did not have advanced seafaring capabilities. These peoples likely ended up in Egypt, thus the connection between the solar religion, suggestion that it is much older than previously thought. Something else that was likely very important to the religion of the Neoliths was magic and what I will call proto-druids. Magic is a term that over the eons has been used to represent many different ideas. However, in the time of the Neoliths, magic, I believe, was a scepter of which the priestly caste used to assert their authority. A proto-druidic priestly class likely emerged and persisted in the Neolithic period of Western European history. This priestly caste would have used magic as the basis of their grasp in society. Magic and its shamanistic practitioners contain within itself three principal arts which is leveraged for control of a general populace. Firstly, and most potently, medicine. both its properties and practice, was completely monopolised by the magic class, that is, the shamans and priests. Why this held sway over people needs scarcely to be explained beyond a brief description. Medicine then and now is a craft required by inevitably every living soul throughout the course of one's life. The monopoly of healing in both knowledge and experience gave the Neolithic priesthood a practical reason for the populace to support them, which they jealously would have guarded. The second function of the priesthood likely would be to hold monopoly over anything to do with religion. A most seductive and flattering of promises, fertility, victory in battle, purity of the soul. Any and all of those who wish for a boon from the gods or spirits must needs rely and obey the priestly caste. The third and final art which the shamans probably held sway over was astrology, which was a crown jewel for the proto-druidic priesthood. Knowledge of the future has always been desirable, as much to hill dwellers at the edge of the world to kings of kings upon golden thrones. And for submission, the shaman would look to the boundless sky and see in the stars what no one else could. Through their orders colossuses were erected for his divinations and prophecy. This was the nature of the proto-druidic priesthood of the Neoliths. They were the glue that kept this early civilization together, and in due course by successors, holding the same monopolies. It is easy now to look back and scoff at our ancestors as superstitious, yet the purpose that these priests gave our ancestors and their success in holding such an early society together should not be overlooked, and we should ask ourselves who or what fills these niches for us today. With all that being said on the nature of the Neolithic priesthood, I will now describe to the best of my abilities the priesthood on Orkney. Although physical evidence of this priesthood's activity on Orkney is unfortunately lost to time due to the extensive and impressive ceremonial Neolithic sites on the island, such as the Rings of Brodgar, the Stones of Stennis, and the Comet Stone and sundry other examples, we can infer that almost definite existence of such a priestly caste upon this island during this period. With that being said, I shall now give a mental picture of what these priests would be like in action. They most definitely would have worn distinctive clothing. Perhaps, other than landed rulers, the priestly class would have been the first group to intentionally visually distinguish their profession by articles of clothing. Wearing such garments as cloaks made of special animal hides, or woven textiles adorned with beads and painted patterns, alongside jewellery crafted from bones, stones and shells, all to reflect their status and role in society and their connection to the divine. Ritual practices and medicine would have been their domain, as well as possibly speciality advisory positions to powerful families or groups, as evidenced by the existence of Neolithic decorative stone balls, which were clearly some symbol of authority, giving further credence to the existence of complex, hierarchical social structure during the Neolithic. Neolithic communities in Scotland were not at all isolated. Archaeological evidence has shown there were extensive trade networks connecting regions within Scotland and far beyond, all the way to continental Europe. Materials from all over Scotland and further afield, like flint, pottery and exotic items such as pitch stone from the Isle of Arran, have all been found in the Isle of Orkney. Orkney, with its central position between the Northern Irish seas, would have served as a hub of trade and likely cultural exchange. Trade facilitated the spread of ideas, technologies and cultural practices, from farming techniques to the construction of megalithic monuments. However, the extent and nature of this connectivity varied, with some regions during the Neolithic remaining more or less isolated, especially when compared to Orkney, due to the different environmental conditions. Neolithic society in Scotland likely had a degree of social stratification, especially amongst the landowners and priests who coordinated large projects like building and war, which required organisation. Daily life, however, would have been rooted in communal activities like farming, toolmaking and feasting. Art and decoration were also an important aspect of Neolithic culture. Pottery from this period, such as grooved wear style, which originated in Orkney, featured intricate patterns and designs. Similar artefacts have been found all over Scotland, indicating shared aesthetic traditions across our regions with some local variation. Whilst Orkney provides a clear view of Neolithic culture, lifestyle and achievements, coastal regions, with their access to marine resources, developed differently from inland areas, where communities relied more heavily on farming and forest resources. The rugged highlands, for example, posed challenges that may have encouraged smaller, more dispersed settlements compared to the dense communities of Orkney or in the lowlands. Despite these differences, the Neolithic peoples of Scotland shared a common thread. They adapted ingeniously to their surroundings, blending new agricultural practices with older traditions of hunting, gathering and fishing. As well as religious traditions, they have left for us, the modern day Scots, a legacy of monumental architecture, spirituality and unbroken connection to our country. The Neolithic era in Scotland represents a period of profound transformation, where human ingenuity began to reshape the landscape and lay the groundwork for the societies that followed. The Orkney Islands, with its rich one-of-a-kind archaeological sites, offers, as I have hopefully shown, a window into understanding this world. Whilst Orkney dominated the north, to the south, the Neolithic peoples of Brittany were the preeminent regional power. Totally unmatched for architectural ingenuity, the Bretons created some of the most remarkable feats of the Neolithic world. They erected the largest collection of megaliths on Earth, including the awe-inspiring 10-metre tall, 300-ton menhir, which means a standing stone, the largest man-made structure in the Western world, at least for its time. Their settlements were highly sophisticated for the era, featuring large villages that served as hubs for activity and culture. Brittany was not only a centre of innovation, but also the heart of an extensive international trading network, linking tribes and regions as far away as the Swiss Alps to the Highlands of Scotland. Archaeological evidence also suggests that Brittany may have held religious significance, with its megalithic monuments, perhaps serving as holy sites like Iona or Canterbury for later Christians. The Neolithic Bretons were far and away the most advanced culture for their age and region, with their influence in many ways radiating across all of Western Europe. Yet, just as all men must die, so too must our civilizations. For some, it takes several millennia, for others a few centuries or even a few decades. And destruction came for the Neoliths with a vengeance. Halfway through the second millennium BC, a people with an utter mastery of warfare descended upon the Neoliths. They brought with them metal, horses, and a language from which nearly all modern languages in Europe are now derived. A people that would come to dominate the greater part of the earth, perhaps the most successful and important collection of people that has ever been, the Indo-Europeans. Hope you liked that video. If you did, please subscribe, like, and all the rest of it. This is my first YouTube video. I apologise for any sloppiness. A list of sources I'll put in the description, and stay tuned for the next episode. And there's a link to the Patreon if you want to support this. And if I've probably made mistakes, if I've made any mistakes, please let me know down below. Goodbye.